At 3:10 a.m. on the 31st of May 1916, the first reconnaissance group departed port, and the fifth and final ship in line was the battlecruiser Von der Tann, under the command of Kapitän Zerzy Hans Zenker. The German battlecruisers would head on a northerly course at a speed of 15 knots, and Von der Tann would trail the Moltke by roughly 800 meters, as ordered by Vice Admiral Hipper, whom was in charge of the battlecruisers. By noon, the Germans had spotted a line of Dutch trawlers, and by 12:30, visibility had dropped to roughly 4 nautical miles. Over the next couple of hours, visibility would improve to roughly 15 nautical miles, and by 15:30, Von der Tann received a message from the cruiser Elbing, which had spotted British warships on the horizon. By this point, the German battlecruisers were heading on a northwesterly course, and the distance between them and the British reconnaissance group were closing. The British reconnaissance group was under the command of Vice Admiral David Beatty, and he had 6 battlecruisers and 4 battleships at his disposal, the battleships each mounting 8 15-inch guns, which were the largest guns present for the battle. Beatty's advantage in numbers was 2-1, but due to issues with signaling, the 4 Queen Elizabeth-class battleships would fall behind the battlecruisers and would not be able to engage the German battlecruisers during the opening stages of the run to the south. As a result of this numerical superiority, Vice Admiral Hipper knew he could not let his battlecruisers get trapped by the British, and so he ordered his formation to turn south as well and run parallel to the British. This would prevent the British from blocking his line of retreat, and it was also luring them towards the High Seas Fleet, which was the main body of the German Navy. At 16:46, the destroyer B-109 reported that the British battlecruisers had action signals raised, and they were preparing to open fire. Aboard Von der Tann, Artillery Officer Korvettenkapitän Marolz would later write, "For a long time I occupied my post on the direction indicator periscope and directed my battery and rangefinders on the enemy, which was magnified 15 times through my glass, and I could clearly make out the enemy's ships. Fire distribution from left, the signal mat called through the armored slit, and I slowly counted along the enemy line through my periscope. The loading of the guns had been ordered some while before, and in the turrets the men had shoved armor-piercing shells into the barrels, on which a not-too-friendly greeting for the English had been written in chalk." At 16:48, the head and flagship of the German line, Lutzow, would open fire, and 1 minute later, Von der Tann would also open fire on the 6th and final ship in the British line, which was HMS Indefatigable. Von der Tann opened fire at a range of 162 hectometers, or roughly 10.5 miles. Von der Tann would use a ranging method called the fork method, which was standard in the German Navy during the First World War. The first 2 turrets would fire a 4-gun salvo. Each gun was set at a different range. In this case, the shells were set to fall roughly 200 meters apart from one another. The fall of shot would be observed, and then, based on the shell that fell closest to the target, the after turrets would be adjusted to also fire in a closer fork, and these shots would also be observed. Once when Von der Tann straddled the enemy, it would rapid fire until hits were scored, and eventually the target was either disabled or sunk. Artillery Officer Marolz would continue. At the sound of the impact reporting clocks, 4 enormous fountains sprayed over there. The lateral deflection was correct, and the aft superstructure lay in line with the fall of shot. 8 back, 4 more left, 1 salvo was my correction. During the flight time, I allowed the measurements to be given to the EU, which accurately agreed with my indicator. With the quality of the measurement, I now expected the fork, and over there 4 water columns jumped high, and for a moment the entire middle part of the target was covered. All 4 were clearly on the water surface, but doubtlessly short. 4 forwards, 1 salvo, and after the flight time, another struck near the enemy. 2 impacts short, 1 over, and the 4th was not seen, probably a hit. The list leader assured me that 4 shots had fallen in the salvo. The armor-piercing shell only exploded inside, and therefore the effect could only be seen if the interior was clearly destroyed. I guarded myself against observing hits and adhered strictly to observing the fall of shot. My young lieutenant in the mast also reported a hit. Straddling, good rapid. Followed the order after the impact, and salvos now followed in brief intervals. Salvos following salvos into the air. The enemy fired slowly. You could clearly see the flash of their salvos, and those who had time could use a stopwatch to determine the enemy fall of shot near the ship. Still, the enemy did not shoot very well, and many salvos came nowhere near the target. Probably over there. They had poorer visibility than us, and our light ship color made it difficult in the hazy weather. Meanwhile, the fire of Von der Tann was extraordinarily successful, and the enemy sometimes disappeared completely in the surrounding columns of water. As Indefatigable was so covered, seemingly she ceased fire and attempted to withdraw from the deadly fire by a zigzagging course, but thanks to the good glasses, each movement could clearly be recognized. The enemy turned away, and despite the straddles, I changed 1 hectometer ahead, then she turned nearer, 1 hectometer back, and changed the deflection a little to the side, to the bow of the enemy. Whilst the salvo was underway, a new position for the indicator was ordered, and I immediately received the new movement and deflection ahead for the new position of the enemy. What's interesting about Marholtz's account is that he stated that Indefatigable ceased firing, began zigzagging, and appeared to attempt disengaging Von der Tann. As for standard English sourcing, I have not seen this written before, though that doesn't mean there are no English sources out there that don't suggest this happening, but unfortunately Indefatigable was the 6th and final ship in the British line, meaning it had received little attention from the ships preceding it, and Indefatigable's crew, for the most part, did not survive the battle, so we don't exactly know what was happening on board the ship. What we do know for certain are the events that occurred next, as at 1703, Von der Tann would strike Indefatigable near the after gun turret with a couple of shells from a full gun salvo, and the after magazine would explode. Indefatigable would veer off to starboard, either due to losing control of its steering, or it was attempting to evade further hits. Marholtz wrote how this moment appeared. Then, 14 minutes after opening fire, the enemy was fatally damaged. In the direction indicator periscope, briefly after the impact of a salvo, I saw a giant explosion in the aft gun turret. A bright flash flame, the ship's debris was thrown into a wide arc through the air. Seemingly it was the turret roof, which, through the pressure of the explosion inside, had been lifted off. Unfortunately for Indefatigable, even though it was veering off to starboard and settling by the stern, Von der Tann had already unleashed another salvo, and this would reach the ship. This time, shells would strike on the bow of Indefatigable, resulting in yet another explosion within the vicinity of a turret. Marholtz also wrote how this scene appeared. The next salvo gave the ship a rest. It hit further forward, and soon after the impact, a tremendous black smoke cloud climbed up from the ship, reaching double the mast height, and the enemy ship disappeared from sight. Probably an oil bunker was hit and burning. For the sake of certainty, another salvo was fired into the smoke cloud, but scarcely would have reached the target, which had already vanished into the waves. Although the auxiliary observation officer was certain the enemy had sunk, I was skeptical because I knew from experience just how easily at this range one can be mistaken, and people often see what they want to see. Only after the smoke had cleared and nothing was to be seen, and the other officer assured me again and again, did I allow myself to be convinced and reported the success to the commander. Below decks, the news that the enemy had blown up spread like wildfire, and in my headphones I could hear the cheers of the men. In total, Von der Tann would fire 52 28cm projectiles and 38 15cm projectiles at Indefatigable in 14 salvos. The 3rd, 4th, 11th, 12th, and 13th salvos would all score hits. Indefatigable's X turret exploded during the 12th salvo, and the A turret exploded during the 13th salvo. The 14th salvo was the one that was fired into the smoke after Indefatigable had exploded, and most likely scored no hits. The British would conduct an inquiry into the sinking of Indefatigable, and the conclusions were uncertain as to why Indefatigable exploded, but there were some good theories proposed. Regardless of why Indefatigable exploded, it was clear that the British needed to make alterations to the battlecruisers when going forward, and several changes would be implemented throughout the remainder of World War I, and the final battlecruiser under construction, Hood, would see some serious design alterations. A total of 1,022 men would go down with the Indefatigable. Only 2 men would survive, and they would be picked up by the German destroyer S-16. Indefatigable's wreck was discovered in 2001, resting at a depth of roughly 48 meters. The ship was heavily broken up and potentially resting upside down. Unfortunately, at the time of its initial discovery, the stern was not found with the bow, though, roughly a decade later, the stern would be discovered resting roughly 500 meters away from the bow. Indefatigable's loss is one of the most studied naval disasters of the First World War, and putting in the German perspective is important to completing the story of the ship's final moments. With that having been said, there's nothing more I have to add on to this topic for today. So, if you have learned something new in this video, why not leave a like and a comment down below, and have a wonderful day.